and welcome to this special episode of the Dental Guys podcast. I'm Wes, the Dental Guy.
And I'm Jon, the Dental Guy, and here we are, Wes, bringing it to our listeners. This, I know, is going to be another really great episode. If you've seen the title ahead of time, you know we're going to be bringing it with some high-level guests. That's what it's all about, Wes. And I think this show is going to challenge some people to think differently, and that's what it's all about, is thinking about how can you take your practice to the next level.
Next level dentistry and digital innovations. And, Jon, the old man in the room, Jon is Jon Rogers, the late to the table in scanning. If you've listened to the Dental Guys for a very long time, you know that Jon, it took like pulling teeth, no pun intended, to get him to get into scanning.
Yeah.
And
I was
and
angry
now,
about it.
And
yeah,
now, Jon,
I was like,
all we're talking about is photogrammetry this, photogrammetry that.
I know.
And then
Here I am.
The frustrations of digital, the love of digital, like what the heck is going on? Adoption rates are up. We're here to talk about it with Darin from Spear Education. Super pumped about that, Jon. I'm fresh off of the plane literally yesterday. This is August 26th. If you're listening to this, I am fresh off the plane literally yesterday. Got back from the advanced treatment planning workshop with Jeff Rouse and Greg Kinzer. It was incredible. Jon, you finished it up last year. I wasn't able to take it with you. I ended up taking Excellence in Composites. Great course. But this course, Jon, is the capstone course to the core curriculum at Spear Education.
And I think a lot of people don't know necessarily when you look at Spear's sort of course layout, it is in there. It is, you can find it on their website, what that kind of means, but it's evolved in the last few years, to be fair. From, there were some courses that were kind of always the pathway that they would recommend you to begin and progress through the ecosystem. And then I think in the last 5 years, especially, they've really crystallized that number of courses that are, hey, here's what, if you want to become proficient in sort of the language of treatment planning and occlusion and all the way from basic to complex, this is how you go. And over the last, several years, Wes, of course, COVID threw a wrench in our, timeline a little bit, but we've been able to progress our way through that core curriculum. And the interesting thing, when we talked about this just earlier today, I didn't expect necessarily, I was excited when advanced treatment planning was sort of released. I was like, okay, yeah, this is maybe like a culmination of a lot of stuff. And but I didn't necessarily expect that it would be like you finish it and you go, oh, that's the last course. And they talked a lot about that right out there, is this like, well, this is kind of the thing that we're not going to like add another course. Like,
and
this
you get a plaque, and and there's a dinner, and it's an amazing thing. I will say this, is that it has transformed Jon and I's practice. You guys know that we have enjoyed the Spear journey, and we will continue to enjoy, taking Spear courses. There are other workshops besides the core classes, and we've talked about those in the past. But advanced treatment planning, if you haven't taken it, there are prerequisites to it, and contact your Spear advisor, and they can help you out to navigate what you need to take before you take it. You definitely don't want to be in this class, trust me, unless you've taken the prerequisites, because there are things that are discussed in this class that really have really been built on the knowledge leading up to this. And I want to say this, is that the goal of Spear is to help people help dentists recognize people's problems, help them with a correct diagnosis, be able to communicate that diagnosis and create awareness for what's possible. And treatment planning that is not always what you think that Spear is all about, which is, this idea that it's about cutting crowns and doing full arch and opening up vertical. It's not that.
Well,
that is a part of it.
The thing that I'll just say that, if you're listening to this and you're maybe new to the show, if you've listened to this show for it's been almost 10 years, which
almost
is crazy.
10. Mm-hmm.
If you've listened to this for almost 10 years, you've listened to us go through the journey of this discovery, and you understand already what we're talking about. If you're somewhat new, because what we've done is we didn't just go to the courses, but we've actually implemented the ideas into our practices, and it's resulted in some amazing successes. But maybe more importantly, even if you're new to this, just having the ability to speak the same language with people, and you see as you go through this continuum, all of a sudden you start seeing some of the same people, and you get to these more advanced courses, and people come in and they present a case, and instead of you trying to get everybody on the same page with what's going on, you have every single person in the room by the end of this is like, oh, okay, we got this, we got that type of wear, we got this situation, we got these types of things that I'm seeing. And you get to have really great discussions because you already know the basics. And so I think it's been cool to get through all that.
Imagine sitting down, and I think, Greg said this at the beginning of the course, is that it's going to be in the advanced treatment planning course, at the beginning of this, when you're introduced to the breadth of patients and the treatment planning that you do in the course, and you actually work on actual patients that Jeff and Greg have actually seen in practice, and you get to see these cases, and you get to come up with the plans and the diagnosis. In the beginning, I think it was taking our groups about 22 minutes on Thursday afternoon to do some of the treatment planning. By the end of the course, we were treatment planning some of the most complex cases that you can possibly imagine in 11 minutes. And so imagine just being able to see quickly, people and their problems. And it's fun. I had a blast. It really solidified for me where, Jon and I have been going. And we won't go into the high weeds on that with a lot of our treatment planning and how we're helping our patients. But, I really appreciate us being able to offer this type of content. And Spear Education has offered listeners the opportunity to start somewhere. And they're giving half off to Dental Guys listeners or anyone listening to this for seminars. $500 credit. Just use the offer code Dental Guys. It's in the description below. You can check that out. Whether you're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, the code is below. And head on over and sign up for a seminar. That's a great way to, we talk about and cheap but good CE and $500 to take a 2-day in-person seminar. Incredible value where you can start your spear journey and get really inspired and really start learning some of these awesome dental concepts. So I appreciate Spear for helping our listeners out to on board there. Jon?
Yes, absolutely. And another shout out to one of our longtime sponsors, the Dental Crafters Network. This is one of the OG sponsors of the Dental Guys, and we appreciate their partnership over the years. Discover the difference a relationship with the Dental Crafters Network can make. As a full-service laboratory, they pride themselves on listening and understanding your unique needs, guiding you toward innovative solutions that make a difference. Dental Crafters Network focuses on improving your patient's quality of life with cutting-edge digital dentistry solutions. Visit dentalcrafters.net or call 1-800-472-8302 and mention the Dental Guys to receive 10% off your first case. 10% off just for mentioning the code Dental Guys. So, and as just a little bit to tie that in, Brad, the dental lab guy, was at the advanced treatment planning workshop with me, brought 2 of his high-level lab technicians to Spear, and has gone through the entire curriculum as a lab, including multiple lab technicians and a mechanical engineer. So I just want you to have a feel for, there's not a lot of labs that are committed to that kind of thing.
Yeah, super pumped about the upcoming workshop that we're taking with Brad, the dental lab guy. We're actually auditing, Jon and I are, and we're taking our associates to Spear Education in November of 2024. Super pumped about that. There'll be more to talk about that. The Dental Guys is also brought to you by Restorative Driven Implants. U.S. based, that's important, Jon, surgical training. This is 60 plus hours of in-person and online training, and it all culminates with a 2-day intensive surgery in the United States. It is amazing. We fly you into Minneapolis for 2 weekends prior to surgery, and then a third weekend we head up to northern Wisconsin, and it's incredible. These cases that we bring to the table are the cases that you see in real world practice. We're not as a implant continuum. You don't go learn full arch implants right out of the gate. You go to learn how to do atraumatic extraction, how to do consistent grafting techniques, how to do immediate extraction, immediate placement the right way with proven results designed by myself and Jon in the core curriculum. We've chosen some of the best minds in the field to adopt our teaching methods for. And then also healed ridge, how to treatment plan implants for healed ridge, and a modern way of thinking when it comes to implants, CT guided surgery. The digital age is here, and if you're not doing guided surgery on your implants, come and learn at Restorative Driven Implants. Visit restorativedrivenimplants.com right now or call 715-207-6587. We're booking for 2025 courses as we speak. Jon, this is it. You know, at one time, Darin from Spear Education was the most featured spear educator on the Dental Guys podcast. And I think if I went back and I figured this up right, if we include tonight, some people at Spear are not going to like this, but I think that he is the number one featured spear education doctor on our podcast. We are so pumped to bring you Darin Dichter tonight, and I've just screwed his name up. But welcome. Oh, I've muted Darin. Now you can talk, Darin. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Dental Guys podcast.
No, you nailed it, right? You got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dichter.
I did get it right. So
yeah, great job.
I didn't practice saying it because I've said it so many times because you have been. Welcome back to the Dental Guys podcast, Darin.
It's nice to be back. You know, it's funny because this, I think, was the first podcast. The first one I did with you was the first podcast I was ever on. I had no idea like what it was. And I remember like how fussy you guys were with the audio. And that's where I thought, oh man, that's really cool. I should learn. I mean, I know a lot about cameras and stuff, but audio, wow, it's really interesting. So I went down this dark rabbit hole of learning audio. So yeah. Thank you.
I'm glad we inspired you. You know, it's funny because I'm at Spear Summit this year, and I've recorded a couple little intros for this podcast with Darin. And the very first thing he says to me after I shoot one of the interviews, he's like, "Canon R6, tell me why you chose that camera." And I was like, "Well, that's a long conversation." But Darin, I love the attention to detail, and welcome to the
fellow
podcast.
Geek, that's just what we appreciate about you.
Yeah, well, it's nice to be back, and seeing you guys at Summit was like awesome. We're really excited for this, and excited to bring everyone up to speed on some of the new things that we're doing, and just to hang out with you guys and chat.
Well, I think
that's the fun part.
That's what we enjoy, the most. I think is just getting to kind of hear what you have to say and just hanging. But I think the topic, and what we want to maybe at least start with today, and we'll kind of just take it whichever direction we take it. You've got a lot happening out at Spear Education, focused on, and it's it's almost gotten hammered in so many times when we say the words digital dentistry that it somewhat loses its, people just hear it sometimes, I think, these days, and they're like, because it means so many things. It means so many things now, and it meant so many things even, 10 years ago. And so I think when you start to hear some of these things, you go, well, all right, what does that mean? And I want you to just talk a little bit, maybe first, just about, what do you involve teaching out there now? What are some of the courses that are happening? And then I want to talk a little bit about just diving in a little bit to where we are today, and what does digital dentistry implementation, and what makes sense for our practices? How is it changing the way we educate? But first, just talk a little bit about what you're involved teaching. What are some of the things you're sort of passionate about in some of the courses that are going on out there?
All right. Well, yeah. So that has changed a little bit since I think I saw you last time. See if I can remember all this. I've got my campus teaching portfolio is looking like the occlusion workshop, the worn dentition workshop, and the complex case planning, phasing, and sequencing workshop, which happens right before the advanced treatment planning workshop you were talking about a second ago. And it's changed its name. I think it's treatment planning complex cases or something like that. But it slots in nicely from a practicality standpoint, this complex case planning, phasing, and sequencing, because in that course, Greg Kinzer and Bob Winter and I, we go through like how you can take some of the complex cases that we've looked at up until that point and phase them out over a longer period of time, which then kind of leads into what you guys were doing or what you were just talking about with the advanced treatment planning workshop. I'm kind of sad that's not one that I'm in. And I live in Phoenix. My desire was to be with you guys at that dinner, and I had a personal thing come up, so I couldn't come to dinner. So I'm sorry I couldn't hang out with you there. The campus stuff has just kind of exploded. And so that's kind of where I'm living in the core curriculum. I've got a couple of other things I'm doing right now. One is, which you guys experienced early on, was restoring the edentulous arch. That's a 3-day workshop that has evolved recently. When you all took it, I was in there, and Doug Benting, who's a prosthodontist here in Phoenix and a very good friend, he's also like a really nice guy. Him and I kind of created that from scratch, and it's a really personal, intimate like workshop. I love that one. But Doug had to step away from the workshop. He's got a bunch of other stuff on his plate right now with the American College of Pros and some other things that he's doing. So I did it once by myself, and that's a lot. So it was pretty quick. We invited Effie Habsha to come and join us. And if you've ever had a chance to hear Effie speak, or better yet, taken one of her workshops, she's a super talented prosthodontist, fantastic educator, and also a really nice person to hang around with. So in my mind, she's kind of like the total package here, because she's got, and this is restoring the edentulous arch. So she's got like, I'm a nice person kind of box checked. She's got clinical excellence checked, and then she can teach it, which is really rare when you start thinking about the scope of restorative sort of management solutions that we're talking about in that course. So that one's evolved quite a bit. There's a lot more digital in that one now than when you guys took it. Back a couple of months ago, well, this is maybe more like a year ago, we were in the same kind of situation we just were introing with here, with like, what does digital mean, and where are we with digital? And we were hearing some people kind of grumbling that, well, SPEAR education, they're just concept. They're old school analog people, and they're not up to speed on what's happening in the digital world. And to counter that, we kind of going to counter that two different ways. Number one is, in my mind, and I'm sure talked about this a whole bunch, digital is an approach. There are a number of different tools that are going to slot in under that definition, but it's one approach to getting from where you are now to where you want to be. And a lot of that lives inside the existing workshops in the core curriculum. So like in the occlusion workshop, for instance, I talk about all kinds of digital stuff in there, from scanning a patient to getting a case virtually articulated and kind of all that. So it just kind of slots in like it's another thing. So we don't make a big deal about it. But then there are people who've like gone through a bunch of our curriculum that did it before digital was really a thing. And so what they're kind of wondering is, well, how do I make digital work in my practice? And so we do have some standalone digital things that we're doing. One of those is a 3-day workshop. Sorry, take that back. It's a 2-day workshop that I do with Mike Scramstead, who some of your listeners may know from the CERECDoctors.com days or the CDocs days. He's kind of, I guess we stole him from CDocs, and he's been on the Spear side now for a better part of a year anyway. And Mike and I put together this, it's a 2-day hands-on workshop that is really like tool driven. How do you use digital tools to do your facially generated treatment planning, and kind of how do they fit together? So that one I think is really fun. And it also ties together really well with a workshop a seminar that Mike and I do that's also 2 days. And the seminar is a new one. The seminar, we're going to launch the first one of those actually here in just a couple of weeks. Maybe first or second weekend. Well, you've got it here on the screen. First or second weekend, we're going to be doing a seminar where I will be part of that team. But Mike, who is like an advanced CEREC user, and he's been working digital in a restorative practice for, decades, right? He's one of the original CEREC people. And so he's going to bring his experience. And we've really done like a nice job bringing Kim Schlam into this. And if you guys haven't had a chance to talk with Kim yet, she's awesome. She's a prosthodontist who's practicing up in my old neck of the woods in Bend, Oregon. I didn't ever get to live in Bend. I lived on the rainy side of the state, but she's practicing in what a lot of people's dream towns would be in that state. And she's got a really cool situation where she's come out of the military and she's opening up, or has opened up, a pros practice that she is kind of like adjacent to her husband, who's a surgeon. And so she's able to do some really cool stuff in there, and she's really digital forward. The type of cases that she does are different from the type of cases that Mike's doing. And so we're trying to compare and contrast the different practice styles and how digital kind of fits with the style. Rather than say there's kind of like one digital that fits all. I don't think that's ever going to be true. It's like, if you're thinking about digital, or you have some digital and you're wondering how to make it work in your practice, these are two like kind of different restorative type practices. And you can get a sense of how, Kim is doing one thing and Mike is maybe doing another. And then you'll have me who's, I don't want to say later to the game of digital, but I'm bringing the voice of the person who I know how to do this stuff really well in the analog world. And for me, I don't do digital just to force digital. I use digital because I want to be more efficient in some way. And so I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But that's kind of like, that's my campus portfolio. Good. I got another seminar that I do with the team that we roll around, the Spear Live. I'll be coming into the Spear Worn Dentition seminar. So ton of stuff live on campus and on the road. I got all kinds of online, and you guys know the deal. I got pretty much got my hands in every pot right now.
It's good. We're excited about it because we believe in what you're teaching, and there's a lot to kind of unpack there. I think that adoption of digital technology post-COVID has just skyrocketed. Some say up to 50%, some say greater than 50%. Some of our listeners in dental school and just post-dental school coming out have had little to no exposure. Some have had, a lot of exposure to digital. And even in private practice, if we just say half of the people have had little to no exposure, and then half are just like starting to kind of get into it in the last, let's just say 5 years. But because before 2020, really the adoption rate was really having trouble getting above 20%. And most of those people that were adopters were just people that were either scanning and sending them scans to the lab to have indirect restorations fabricated, maybe indirect night guards, appliance therapy, or even maybe surgical guides. And then obviously you have people that are they're doing everything in their practice. They're milling, they're printing, those type of things. Those haven't gone away, but there is some sort of digital in probably 50% of dental offices, if not directly. We know that directly that's in their office, but indirectly, we know that even in our laboratory, that 100% of our crowns are being designed digitally for single units. And so there are some efficiency things that come with owning, scanning technology and all that. I want you to talk a little bit about the people that have this less than 5 years of experience, because that seems to be the majority of people right now that are listening to this. They may have a digital scanner. They may have dabbled in the things that have been tried and true over the last, let's just say, 15 years, of scanning. Because I've been scanning since, my first scan was in 2001, but my true introduction to scanning and really the efficiencies of it in private practice was in 2009. But there's some things that were tried and true. And I wanted you to talk about what we can get by coming to this course, this seminar, that's going to help that 5-year out implementation. How are we integrating just the basics and making what we're doing, what you said, is more efficient?
Oh, yeah. A lot to unpack just with that part. When you're thinking about digital in practice, let's start there, because we had a pretty heated internal discussion at Spear about digital. Like, there was this camp that said, you guys need more digital, and we're like, we have digital. And then, I kind of challenged back with, well, define for me what qualifies as digital for you. Because let's take photography for a second. Like, I'm old enough that I shot slide film. And so for me, there is a difference in my hands feeling a film camera and feeling a digital camera. That is not true for anyone who's graduated in this, millennium. So a digital, camera is just a camera. And it's doesn't matter if it's digital or film. It's like, the main difference is, are you taking pictures or not? And then how do you use those pictures? That's a way, way more important discussion than digital versus film, right? No one's going to use film today. But that's kind of where we are now with impression making. Are we going to make an analog impression, or are we going to make an optical impression? And it would be awesome if one was just 100% better than the other. But there are times, and you guys know this, there are times where you can make an optical scan that is just loaded with inaccuracy. Things like not having a calibrated scanner, having long edentulous spaces, having saliva on the teeth. There's ambient lighting. There's a number of things that can negatively impact the accuracy of the STL file. And so I think it's great to be able to scan, for sure. In my life, I hope to never have to make another analog impression again. And every so often, I'm working on a denture case right now, conventional denture case, and I had to make an analog impression, had to border mold it, and then make an upper and border mold it and make a lower. So there's times where you have a set of tools available to you, and there's one that might be your favorite, which could be your chairside scanner. And then you look and say, well, okay, cool. I have this thing that we're all in the office really good at using. We've got all of our workflows dialed in, and it's not going to work for this patient. Cool. I've got another tool. I can go and use that. And so I guess that's kind of how I think about digital. The next layer of the question then is, how do you use it? And I think that's where the seminar that we put together, I think, is really going to be helpful, because it's just such a broad kind of covering of different digital technologies and how they get used in practices. Allows you to, as a user, as a clinician and a digital user, allows you to get a sense of, okay, if I want to bring this technology into my practice, every second that it's sitting, on the counter not being used, you're losing money on it. So your chairside scanner, that might just be the most expensive piece of equipment you have in the office. So if you're not using it, it's it's a really expensive misjudgment, I guess. So from a practice management standpoint, from a financial security standpoint, I think it's important to understand, like, if I'm going to do this, there needs to be a good return. And it's so funny, like the ROI, the return on investment, the corporate buzzwords, like that stuff drives me crazy.
Yeah.
And yet there's like, you're about to shell out a bunch of cash for a scanner, even if you get a cheap one, you get one off from AliExpress or whatever. It's like, it's not free. And so you got to have a plan of how what are you going to do with it? How are you going to use it in practice? How are you going to train up your staff to do it? What are you going to do with all of the files that it kicks out? Where are you going to store all those? How do they get transferred to the laboratory? Like there's a ton of stuff to think about, which is all different from, oh, I'm thinking digital. That means I have to be prepared to, do chairside milling or do design and milling for my restorations, which was the old chairside CAD/CAM mindset.
Yeah. So I think your efficiency with those, if you implement that tool, you're just talking about intraoral scanning as an example. I think it's at this point, if we talked about this, Wes, 5 years ago on the show or more, that maybe even longer, before I was really doing a ton of scanning, maybe like 10 years ago. And, you could have a conversation about efficiency. And there were at that time reasons why you could maybe say, hey, maybe I could be more efficient with analog workflows in some ways. Now, I think it's pretty easy to make the case for certain workflows, just like we talk about the posterior single unit crown, for instance, being very, very efficient. And but I think that, one of the things you brought up, you mentioned just as we were kind of getting into the conversation, Darin, is you said, I don't do digital just to force it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do it to force it. I do it because I want to increase my efficiency in some way. And I want you to maybe talk about some examples of that outside of what we're doing with, say, the posterior single unit crown that would encourage clinicians to maybe look at other types of technology that they might want to implement into their office, or at very least technology that they might want to understand on the laboratory side if it's not in their own office.
Yeah. Well, so single units, Dentsply Sirona just nailed it with their CEREC model. It's funny. Model is not the right word because it's model-less. It's a digital joke. I know that's not going to transfer on audio, but it's hilarious to me. So to model this workflow, anyway, I think, Dentsply Sirona nailed it. They realized that a really common procedure in a restorative practice was to do one or two single units in the posterior. Mm-hmm. One or two single units in the posterior, probably, the vast majority of dentistry that gets done on Earth. And so you have a tool that allows you to go from 2 appointments to 1 appointment. And from an efficiency standpoint, you don't have to reappoint the patient. Sure, it's a longer appointment and you got some other things you're going to have to manage. But from an efficiency standpoint, if you look at the big picture, you don't have all the shipping that's going to the laboratory for the indirect fabrication. You don't have to worry about losing things in the mail. You don't have to, like, all the time that is lost in between. You don't have the time of fabricating the provisional. So there's a time trade-off, but the net result is it can be more efficient. Now, I'm not saying that's going to work for everyone, right? Because I've got a lot of friends who, were early kind of heavy hitters with doing posterior dentistry or even anterior dentistry, doing it chairside CAD/CAM, just like knock it out in a day. Mm-hmm. And now they're kind of like, by the time I get done with that, it's a longer appointment. I'd rather just have, someone else make the provisional, which you can do digitally. And then the case goes to a laboratory and we have all the fabrication done in the lab. But understanding, you've got the option to do all that stuff, I think is really nice. And so that's where I think, one of the avenues that is emerging right now is in the fabrication. So the chairside scanning, the optical scanning, there's a lot of good scanners out there now. If you look at the literature, and we've kind of like, it's not like there's one clear winner. They do about the same. They kind of like have different software interfaces for depending on what you're trying to do. One might be better than another, but they all work really pretty well. And so if the scanner technology and the scanner results are all like pretty similar, then the next thing is, okay, well, I got a scanner. What am I going to do with it? I can scan and I can send it to someone else and let them work on it. Or I may say, well, I want to be able to make something digitally in the office. So milling was kind of the first way to do that. Chairside milling, not an uncommon thing to have in practice. And I'm sure you guys have talked about that before. But where, I think a lot of interest is headed, and this is getting to your point of, where some people may be trying to force it, is with additive manufacturing or 3D printing. 3D printing, the penetration, this is now maybe 14 months old, but the ADA had published a study on 3D printers, their penetration. So number of dental practices that have a printer in the office. They didn't go with the next question of, are you using it or not? It was just, do you have a printer in the office? And it was like around 10%. It means really low. Mm-hmm. And so you think as a manufacturer, oh man, it's like if we're nearing 50% or arguably at 50% of offices have a scanner, that means people are doing something with these files. Let's give them a tool. Because, there's a big delta between 50% that have scanners and only 10% or so that have printers. So I can see like the argument from a manufacturer standpoint, let's get printers to these folks. But, two big things about that. One is the resins and everything that we're using in printers, we don't have a lot of data on that. But the printer technology itself, the hardware, the software, and then the resins that we're using are just like changing so quickly, the literature has no chance of keeping up with that and probably won't for the near future. So we're left with like, I want to make, provisionals. What kind of material do I want to use? And so I would call you guys and say, what are you using for your printed provisionals? And you say, well, I tried this one, but it sucked. And, for whatever reason, I don't want that. So then and so it's kind of like, it is a little bit, hard for a clinician or whoever's doing this in the office, the manufacturing in the office. I think it's a little challenging for that person to make decisions about what materials to use because we don't have good long-term data. And that in my mind is an example of where digital, I think, is sometimes being forced simply because it's digital. I've got friends that are pushing really hard to go with definitive restorations coming off of a printer. A variety of different printers you could use for that, a variety of different materials, none tested long-term. No 5-year data on any of that. And so you're kind of relying on, I don't know, luck, I guess, to know how these things are going to hold up.
Let's be honest, dude, even millable materials outside of zirconia.
Well,
if
we've all been burnt, right?
Yeah. We haven't even got the days of where there's an alternative to zirconia really in milling that has true data, and yet we're already like trying to print definitive restorations, and then let's not talk even. We don't even have time to talk about trying to make a central incisor crown on a printed model and dealing with texture and light reflections and how good is a resolution of this printer to give you, a good enough texture. And so, but there are people that, and do you think, Darin, is this being driven by the Instagram world? Is this being driven by the idea of, look at my digital workflow? This is just for the sake of doing it, do you think? Or is it are we just tinkerers by nature as dentists who want to like have our own way of doing it that is special? What do you think is because it's an interesting change away from like, let's look at the data and let's hang on a minute. And then when the data's there, we'll then start teaching it. But now it's like almost the labs are the ones that are having to sort of like try to beta things, and, clinicians are asking for things, but they do. So I'm just interested in what you think like is kind of driving that side of things.
I think it's a little bit of kind of three areas. One, I think there is the Instagram thing, and there's like, well, these guys are printing, those guys are printing, and if I'm not printing, I'm behind the curve. And so there's like, I don't want to be left behind. I think FOMO, I think there is a component to that. Um, I think that there's also a fear that, if I wait, this is the classic, argument against dental school education, is that by the time something has been tested and evaluated long term, you probably can't find anyone to use that technique anymore, which so you learn how to do gold castings in dental school. And I'm not knocking gold castings. That's fantastic. But it's like, probably not the number one thing that you're recommending or you're having your patients buy. Let me put it that way. And so if you wait for the research, the argument is maybe I'm going to wait too long. So, I think there's a balance in there. And so that's where I think the third kind of like avenue comes in, and that's from the laboratories. If you and I in a clinical practice are trying to make decisions about what printer to buy and the resins to use and how we're going to use them and stuff like that, if we get burned, we're going to get burned with having to remake restorations and unhappy patients. And if you've done a whole bunch of them, you can have to redo a whole bunch of restorations, negatively impacting the financial health of your practice and maybe your family's financial health. Like, it can be really bad. That shows up in dental laboratories. If they get burned on a bad material, it could kill a lab. And so what I like about trusting a laboratory is sharing a little bit the cost, I guess, of entry, right? So if the laboratory is going to be printing, cool, they buy the printer, and when it wears out, they can replace it and they can worry about the resins and all that. But, when you start looking at what laboratories are recommending, they're generally doing that for two reasons. One is, they're doing it for one reason. Laboratories are leaning into digital because they're short-staffed, and it's easier to get from A to B a lot of times when you're understaffed. Let a robot or a machine do part of the work. So I think that's the main driver in the laboratory. But when you start wondering about, well, what materials do I want to use for this, or how do I want to fabricate? It's not a bad option, I think, to engage with your laboratory and share some of the responsibility with the fabrication process and some of the risk that comes along with using these newer materials. And no matter how busy your practice is, the dental laboratory you work with is working with you times many other dentists or many other offices. And so they're going to do a way higher volume than you or I individually ever will. And so they're going to start seeing problems faster. They're also going to be a little bit more cautious generally with going forward with something that's been untested until they're sure in their own lab that it's going to work because of the risk to the business. So I like, from that respect, I like being able to work with laboratories, but I also get that, digital, a lot of dentists like to be at the bleeding edge of this or close to it. And so there are people that, the CERC guys, the CERC faculty that I work with pretty closely, they were all the people that were up at night, trying to hack the software to get it to do something that the engineers in Germany didn't want it to do. They spent a lot of time just getting to learn the software, getting to learn the hardware because they liked it. For them, that's like fun. And for me, it's less fun. There's some aspects of that I like, but I have other things that I like to do in addition to pushing buttons. So it's like, if that's something that you really like doing, then get after it. I just think that you have to be a little bit careful with some of the promises that manufacturers are making right now with respect to the durability of these materials for long-term restorations.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Now, when you're teaching and how you've seen teaching evolve, so I want to get to the question of what things is digital making us better at? Truly better quality. I want to talk about that. But just from a teaching standpoint, have we reached any inflection points in education that you feel that teaching the digital approach to something first is the way to go, or makes things more efficient? Or do you still feel like teaching an analog approach to a technique or to a way of thinking, whether that's the treatment planning world, whether this is the fabrication of a restoration, whether this is how to acquire data? You have all of these technologies that are now available to take it to be in a completely digital workflow, and there's a lot of interest in learning that. Sometimes you get folks that are coming out of school, for instance, having only done 10 units of fixed restorations, but they want to learn digital. And I guess it's the question of, how should we be, how are you, or how do you feel that we should be looking at, should you do 250 analog restorations before you learn a digital restoration? Or do you feel like it's the way to teach should be teaching, at the same time, hey, here's the analog workflow, and then we're going to do the same thing digital? I mean, I know that's kind of it's not a exact question, but I just want to know your thoughts on where we are in the educational side.
Well, yeah, I'm going to show my generation here. I first of all, in digital, let's just go back to kind of our definition here. When we're thinking digital, there's three aspects. There's going to be the acquisition piece, which chairside scanner, digital camera, CVCT, something that's pulling the information in. There's the fabrication piece, or the manufacturing piece that we've kind of talked about with printers and mills. And then the piece that is the most frequently missed in this whole discussion is the design piece. That's the software piece where you're actually doing the digital waxing, or you're doing the digital trial equilibration, or you're doing the digital occlusal analysis, or it's the software in which you're doing all that stuff. And so with that in mind, I think there are some things that digital can do for us a little bit better. But there are some things that I think it's a little harder. And I'm going to give you an example of a harder one first. I've done an awful lot of kind of full mouth rehabs or larger cases where I've had them done by a technician in wax first, diagnostic wax up. You guys have done the same thing. And looking back, on my career, I don't remember a time where I got a wax up back from a technician and I didn't put it back on the articulator and go through the excursive movements, all the dynamic contacts that can show up, and I didn't change something. And that's from a functional standpoint. It was a functional standpoint because I could feel something in my hands on a mechanical articulator. I do not know how to transfer that feeling to what a clinician would see on a screen. And to me, that is a little bit tricky. It's equally tricky with technicians. You see right now kind of this divergence where in dental laboratories, commercial laboratories, you got technicians who've been trained in the analog world, and they're really good with occlusion because they've been able to feel it, but they're not very good with computers. And then you have computer digital technicians who are really good looking at a screen. And just I've got little kids here, a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old, and they're downstairs playing video games right now. And their video games are happening in 4 dimensions. And they're on a call talking to their friends up the street. And so, they're growing up in an environment where they're looking at a 2-dimensional screen and they're experiencing it in more than 2 dimensions. Mm-hmm. And for me, when I look at a screen, I see a Flintstone cartoon. It's kind of this it's in some ways a little unsettling. So I'm working right now on some ways in my own kind of workflows to navigate that. So checklists. So there's a lot going on. So in a full mouth wax up that's been done virtually, starting with aesthetics and then going through your functional list to make sure that I've checked everything off. But I think, there's the risk that digital can, in that regard, possibly make things faster or more efficient, but comes at a risk of decreasing some of the predictability with the functional outcome. This doesn't happen with every technician, and it's not the end of the world because you or I are always going to have some error as we transfer the wax up to the teeth. And we always compensate for that error by adjusting the occlusion clinically.
Mm-hmm.
So it's probably, I'm blowing this up more in my mind than what is the reality. But
No.
I mean, I'm trying to do as much digital as I can with every respect. And the one thing I can't do digitally is an equilibration. Yeah.
So let me just stop you right there. Okay. Because you are hitting on so many good points right now. So let's do a little show and tell. Okay. And if you're listening to this, right, you need to go over to the YouTube. Okay. Stop. The people are still mowing grass.
Turn off the mower.
Turn off the mower and go to the YouTube channel and find whatever timestamp this is, because I'm going to share a case right now. Okay. And so what Darin is saying, okay, is that we lose something when we go from analog to digital. Okay. And you're going from analog to digital. This face that you're looking at on the YouTubes is an analog face. Okay. You actually touch this thing. You actually manipulate the jaw. Okay. And we learned at Summit that, you know, the digital articulator realm and some of the things, these jaw tracers and all that kind of thing is cool. And AI is doing an interesting thing trying to figure out the motions just on wear facets. But even then, the research and literature shows that these jaw trackers, and they're doing an okay job, but there's something about touching it. So a lot of our cases, they start out like this. And I'm switching it over here to what you're looking at is a digital scan of a high resolution infragum impression for a full arch of crowns and restorations. Okay. Now, the interesting thing about digital is that Darin's been talking about is that we have the ability to do facially generated treatment planning off of digital things, and it creates efficiencies with the laboratory. You see, the laboratory, whether doesn't have the patient in front of us, the lips and the face and all that's been disconnected. And so that's the part. Most of these technicians, especially the younger ones, have never had the opportunity to be chairside. And so whenever I can add in a face scan, okay, and look at lips in repose and pick the incisal edge and rotate this guy's face, as you're looking at on the YouTube, we can go through, you know, lip at rest. We can go through smile. We can actually start to think about where we can have a communication about vermilion borders. Now I'm not going to zoom out because I don't want to show the whole face, but this is a facial scan of someone that we're doing full arch reconstruction on. And so as I look at this, based on the lip length and the things that we learn in facially generated treatment planning, we can actually create some efficiencies for the technician. They can see what we can see. Now, some of this we could look at photography too, but if I was to zoom out, I can actually see this guy's shape of his face. We can put measurements to it, and it's in 3 dimensions. And so if I turn his face back off, okay, go to face scan and turn it off, and I add in my wax up. Okay. Now, what's cool is, like, you know, is we determined based on the face where to put the front teeth. And we're using these digital things to help technicians and dentists see things before we bring them to the mouth. Now, the great thing about this case,
but Darin is saying, though, and I think that this is the useful part of it.
That's right.
But the functional outcomes of these digital wax ups,
this is not digital wax up, John. Okay, this is the marrying of both worlds. Okay, so this actually was hand waxed up and then scanned back in. Okay, and the reason why is because it's very difficult to do certain types of wax ups in digital. For instance, additive is one of those things. That's very difficult to do.
Yeah,
we can
small additive and small addition, right?
Or
small subtraction, small addition.
And even in this case, I asked for an additive wax up, and the technician was immediately, that means I have to go analog and then reverse scan it back in. So we're kind of like a tweener case right here. So you see, there's this use case that understanding the pitfalls. Now I'm not gonna go any more on this, but understanding the pitfalls. Go ahead, Darin. You have something to say.
I do. Can you put that back up there?
Yeah.
And then turn the models 90 degrees. So we're looking at the kind of a lateral view. And then can you stitch the face back in this close up so we don't HIPAA this or anything? Because right before you do it though, look at the occlusal plane. Is it too steep or too shallow or just
well,
right?
It's hard to say, right? Because I've got to manipulate it in some 3-dimension space. And you
exactly. So you're starting to bounce it around, trying to get it lined up, and there's like you're on a screen and there's no reference. And
right,
one of the things
on the vermilion
that is so
border
cool,
right there. So we can start to kind of.
Yeah. So lower the transparency or the opacity of the face scan. Yeah,
Let me
and
get
just
rid of
watch
this
where
here.
the. Yeah, there. So this is a view that I don't think we've ever been able to have before.
Because
there was no way to
line.
merge. Yeah, you can see the face in profile, and because of that, you can see the occlusal plane and the relationship between the occlusal plane and ala tragus. It's like you can see right now if you're going to have an occlusal plane cant. It's a really, really powerful way to see it. Mm-hmm. And so, from this is all in software.
That's right.
But like if you have the capacity to merge all these things together, this is where I think we can do things better in digital than we can analog. Because even if you were in Exocad here,
and that really goes right to the question of, this is what I was kind of hoping we would get to that discussion, which we are right now, of what can we do better? And it sounds like you're saying that, this is the merging together of what we're best at in analog and maybe what we're currently best at or getting to be the best at in digital is to be able to get all this data in a way that it gets the patient as close to being in the technician's same room as we ever have been able to before.
Yeah, you kind of get into this idea of having, the patient avatar or the virtual patient, or a clone of the patient. There's a lot of different ways to describe that, but you do have a better representation of the patient having all that data than you do without it. There is just no doubt. But that data, like as cool as that is, the face scan and all that, I work with a technician in California that, Central California coast, that doesn't have he doesn't have a computer. So if I send him all this stuff, it's like, cool. I don't know what you want me to do with it. Not my wheelhouse. So the technician in that case is like all analog, old school Japanese trained technician, killer work, but not digital. And so like in terms of making things somewhat better for us from a clinician standpoint and from a patient standpoint, if I was to ask an analog technician to do a full mouth wax up for me, 28 units, that might be 6 or 8 weeks before I get it back. Versus you ask the same technician, or you ask a different technician, you ask a digital technician to do something like this, especially if you're doing full coverage, they can knock this out in under an hour for sure. And so it changes, I think, a lot the speed, the pace at which we can kind of get started on things.
Well, and it gets us starting to
comes at a cost.
It does, but I think it starts to get us thinking about too where this better dentistry available to more people as well. The more that we can get this technology into, if the laboratory sort of, as you said earlier in the show, is sort of becomes a clearinghouse of they're investing in. Many of the large capital investments are made by the laboratory, and they're able to, by using this, is, hey, if you can give me all of this that Wes just showed, I can, in a relatively short period of time, give you something that is significantly better than you just sending me a set of models, and saying, I want you to lengthen and size a ledge by 1 millimeter and go from there, and we can get maybe closer from the beginning to an outcome that for maybe even people that don't have as much advanced knowledge. And now this is where we start to lean on the laboratory a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing that I start to see with this is the laboratories in our lab. When we went to advanced treatment planning and had the laboratory there, and like, they're seeing all of this knowledge, being sort of flexed. Really, it's kind of hilarious, and it's like, they're at this course because they know that, frankly, they're having to do the treatment planning many times for the case.
Yeah.
But I think we're beyond the point of just complaining about that, because yes, we would love for everyone to be able to be excellent treatment planners, and Spear can get us there. We know this, but the laboratory, the reality is so the more data they get, the more they can get this information, the better they can do with this, but it's also true that they're getting a lot of garbage data.
Yeah.
And that's a big, it's a big issue too.
This is the problem. And our lab talks about this all the time is the ADA talked about impressions are an issue, and we're having a real hard time getting dentists to even send impressions that even have margins exposed. And 50% of the errors in impression of all impressions sent, thousands that they looked at, had tissue over the margin, critical area of needing for crown preparation and crown fabrication. And so our laboratory talks about this, is that digital isn't the solution to help people get tissue out of the way. It's the training in the analog and the chair side, and learning then how to take what and the tools and the innovations that have come along to make me more efficient and make the dentistry better. And so that comes at a cost too, because then you have to actually unify the technology. And for years there were these two camps, just like Apple and Android, and Microsoft and Safari, and all these the wars that go on between open source and closed source. But now even Sirona has opened up their ecosystem to allow people to communicate. And it's like Darin said, there's many technologies out here, but even some of our laboratories, a lot of them, don't have the ability to put all of this together in a way to be able to communicate effectively. It's a real problem. Do you have it in Dropbox, Google Drive? Where's your pictures at? Are you sending it over versus MediSmile? Is it over BarrayScan? DICOM image. All these things, we really have a hard time getting all of this together. And Spear has really started to even see that as a problem. And at Summit, you guys introduced some amazing things. And you guys are starting to adopt some communication strategies and cloud storage strategies that would allow even new technicians that are fresh right out of school and new doctors to adopt, that would help even just making collaboration better. Talk a little bit about that, and I'll even put it up on the screen as you start to talk about it.
Yeah, well, I think, if you're the kind of clinician that wants to have complete control over everything, meaning you're going to, on an implant, single implant in the posterior, you're going to design it, you're going to extract the tooth, do your, augmentation or preservation or whatever procedures, you're going to place the implant, you're going to uncover the implant. If you two-stage it, you do everything, right? You have complete control. That's one way to roll. And another way to roll is to work with an interdisciplinary team, so that you or I, as the restorative people, could be like the best at the restorative side, and I'm going to be really efficient at doing restorative procedures, and then I can hand off some of the surgical stuff to someone else on my team. And that's where I think a lot of, on the Spear side, I think that's where a lot of us are living, just mainly from an efficiency standpoint, but from a practicality standpoint, it's really hard to reach your own individual potential at every discipline. Versus if you really concentrate on one of the disciplines, I think anyone could get really good at it. But you gotta kind of pick and choose what you want to do. But so there's a couple of different ways you can roll there. But if you're deciding you want to work with someone else on the team, whether it's a surgeon or an orthodontist or endodontist or a laboratory technician, how do we communicate, like, what do we have, what the patient's current condition, and how do we communicate where we want them to go or where we think it could go, and communicate that in a way that we can get real-time feedback from the other people on the team. And so historically, what this would look like is, well, I get enough cases that I finally, have the need to go over to my periodontist office across town and sit down and talk with him about, like, here's these 5 cases, let's knock out, like, here's what I see, tell me what you see, how are we going to get there? And it's like, super time consuming and resource demanding, right? We have to find a day that works for both of us. And it's like, if you forget something, it's like really hard to recommunicate it. It's hard, like, once you're done having that in-person conversation, the information is lost if someone. And so we started looking at different smile design softwares. And it's funny, like 2 years ago, getting a smile design software was, you only had a few to choose from and they weren't all that good. But now, like you mentioned Ray a second, was that a Ray face scanner that you had?
No, it's not, but similar.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a Ray scanner and it comes bundled with the smile design software. Mm-hmm. I have Exocat, comes bundled with Smile Creator. I've just got a number of different softwares that I can use, and I can do kind of like my smile design, right, case planning based on that. And it's like to the point now where there's so many different ways that you could do that it gets confusing. And so you kind of run into, well, how if I'm going to spend the time to do the design so I can show a technician, I want it to be efficient for them to be able to view that too. And that's where I think what you're going to show here is Smile Cloud. It's a software that was designed, inspired by a clinician, really talented clinician in Romania. And it's a smile design software that he's actually been really thoughtful with the shapes of the teeth that you can use. So Florin Kofar is kind of the person behind all this. Florin really wanted to have tooth shapes that were real shapes, not computer generated teeth, not denture teeth, but teeth from humans. And so the library that comes with this software is all based on human teeth and different patients that he was actually seen in his practice. And so you can select from these different shapes, you get different shape libraries, you can kind of choose and pick, and then you can change the dimensions of the teeth, and you can play around with it quite a bit. A ton of softwares can actually do a lot of this. But what do you got to do next? It's like if you need someone else on the team to do something for you, like crown lengthening surgery or ortho, it's like, okay, well, now I need a way to share this with someone else. And so one of the things that we're all really excited about with this software platform is the communication kind of ability with this. It allows you to, as a clinician, to upload software upload acquired assets, bits of information about a person, which could be photos, could be your chairside scans, it could be CBCT data, you upload whatever you want into their platform, and then you can invite other people to the case. And so your technician may want to see something that you didn't see with your design, or your surgeon may see something that you didn't see, and the orthodontist may say, well, what if we just rotate that another 10 degrees? But it allows everybody on the treating team to be able to see all the information at the same time if you're looking together. But I think more valuable is it allows people to see the same information whenever it's like you can do it. And so in some ways, it's like I'm on a bunch of WhatsApp groups, right? And so during the day, I get messages, hey, so post something. And then it's not till 5 or 6 o'clock at night, I finally read the thread and I see what everyone said. That's kind of how this thing works. You have an ongoing chat that everyone on the team can kind of chime in and say, here's what I'm thinking, here's what I'm seeing, what's the next step for the patient. And so although this is one of the more robust smile design softwares I've ever used, I think the real benefit to this for interdisciplinary teams is that communication piece. It is very robust. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing that
oh, go ahead, Wes.
That's something that's been just a real struggle. Just even, as long as I've been taking digital photography is, it started up with, well, you've just exceeded Google's email limit attachment of 25 megabytes. Right. And, I just bought a new camera and one file is larger than 25 megabytes. And, it starts out with that years ago. And then it's like, oh my gosh, what do I get here so that, Jon and I, how are we going to even communicate? And you can't.
And then they're asking for video. This is just like,
it's just out of control. And so really the frustration thing has always been use my portal to send stuff. And then like, how do I have access to the portal? And, I was talking to a clinician the other day, and digital's great. And she, as a lab technician, she has the same frustrations that we have in our clinic. If we have multiple cases going along they're all going along in different parts and pieces. Some are here, some are there, and in different phases of treatment. And so in our office, we've developed a protocol where we have the complex care book, and it's actually, we use it and we actually track the appointments so that I show up tomorrow. Yeah, I've been to Spear for, 4 days and I'm, brain dead and brain fog. And I just want to come in and like start working. My assistant has a complex care sheet for all these. It's a place where we can all unify. Okay. And like calibrate before we go in, and we look good in front of the patient. We don't want to look, well, what are we doing today, Sally? You don't want to look like that. And the same thing happens at the lab, but it's multiplied by 1 million, because if it's a laboratory of any size where there are multiple technicians touching your cases, from digital design to treatment planning implants, there's different cells in the laboratory where they're actually working on different things. And the problem is that, well, how are we communicating at what phase, and how does this affect? This possibly could be a solution. And I don't think any other quote-unquote design software I've seen has that part of it where you can actually follow along and everyone can communicate in the platform. A text string is generated and we can comment on the design, and everyone that's touched it gets notified of that. I think it's pretty cool, and I'm excited to see what Spear does with this and their collaboration, hopefully, with SmileCloud. And hearing him speak at Summit was great. He was a fantastic speaker.
Yeah, Florin is a super nice guy, but just incredibly talented clinician. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, if you guys weren't at Summit, for your listeners, we got to see Vail was showing how this same technology could be used for edentulous arch cases. And then Florin came and spoke on how this could be done even for smaller cases, but aesthetically demanding cases that might be treated with ortho. You could use this. It's not. It doesn't mean every tooth is going to get prepped. It's not that kind of a program. It's a communication tool that I think is pretty cool. And so, going back to the seminar that we're doing, the one I mentioned with Mike Scramstead and Kim Schlam, both Mike and Kim are beta testers. They're kind of early in the acceptance with SmileCloud. So like Kim especially is really close with Florin. She knows the team there. And so, in that seminar, you'll get insight from these two who are working really closely with the engineers that are working in the background and kind of the people that are looking big picture at it. Where if you as I'm speaking about this as someone who's just an end user, right? I work with this with one of my technicians, and we both think it's really cool. And it's like I'm kind of looking over here, waiting for him to text me right now about a case that I was supposed to insert, last week. So it's a really nice way to not have to schedule a time to have a meeting to talk about something. I think it's really nice that way.
Darin, we've asked you before. I've asked you before, and we'll kind of close the show with this. And we're excited about, the edentulous arch. We like dentures. Jon and I are weird. Dentures are teeth. We've said that even dentures could be veneers. because it's all about where 8 and 9 go. And so it's no different than that. But Darin, does digital allow us to get rid of the wax rim?
Oh boy, that depends who you ask. The digital denture people are like, well, I'm going to print you like a try-in. I don't need to make the wax rim because like if the teeth are set correctly, cool. If the wax rim would have been set correctly, cool. But like if you need to change it, then just add or subtract on the teeth. It's a little, I think, more user-friendly for clinicians. So if you're working in a digital denture world, the try-in and the wax rim appointment, I think maybe there's an argument to be made for I don't need wax anymore. Now my hippie is going to show here because you're printing a whole bunch of dentures that aren't going to work well. That's super demanding on the environment. And for me is like you guys, right? We're people who are really used to working with wax, and it is so fast for me to change a wax rim. But that's not everyone's experience. And so I've worked with a number of clinicians that are just more confident working with a trial denture that is incorrect from an aesthetic or functional tooth position standpoint, and just correcting it on the tooth forms in the trial denture and then sending it back to be rescanned and which is a pretty fast operation, right? Because you just rescan it right there and send the file.
The efficiency
it's way
and
faster.
Opportunity we have with Full Arch is a whole nother show, and I'd love to have Darin back on to talk more about photogrammetry.
Yeah, this is one of the things, that we're not going to dive into today.
We're not going to dive in today, but I think the seminar,
a lot about it.
I think the seminar is going to be a great place, Darin, where we can take the people that have adopted this technology in the last 5 years and really solidify where they're at right now, and what we can do really good right now, what we can kind of tinker with and play with and still get some great efficiencies with if we're wanting to stretch it a little bit, not force it, stretch it, okay? And then the next thing is like, what's the future look like, and how can we keep an eye on the future? Wouldn't you say this is what this seminar is about?
Yeah, the seminar and the workshop both. I think we're trying to say, okay, well, cool. If you have this technology in your office right now, you have this tech at your disposal. Here's how it was intended to be used, and here's maybe some other ways you could use it on a procedure that's really common, like making a night guard, right? So here's a way that you could use it that maybe you haven't thought about, that could be something that is small, but something that you do so often in practice that a marginal gain could actually like be meaningful. And then, we'll show some stuff that maybe, you don't have yet, like a face scanner or, mod jaw, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Cool. I love it. Well, I think that, first of all, man, it's been a good conversation. Thanks for hanging with us. It's been really fun.
Sure.
I mean, thanks so much for being on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me again. It's always awesome to be with you guys. I just feel like we're, just hanging out, chatting. So anytime, I'd love it.
Well, yeah, awesome. We definitely have a whole conversation we'd love to have with you about the Full Arch and what steps can we skip, and what steps do we need, and is it anyway? That's a whole. We won't dive in, but we know
bias the whole conversation.
Right. No, that's why that's the clickbait, right? That's the clickbait.
Yeah.
Can we skip all the steps, right? And we kind of already know the answer, but that would be another great show. And so those of you who have not, maybe if this is your first time finding out about Darin Dichter and what's going on out there, please go check him out. See what he's teaching, what he's passionate about. He's got a lot of great online content as well. So make sure you check him out. And definitely check out the core curriculum out at Spear. If nothing else, get involved. What we want for all of our listeners, doesn't matter if it's Spear, doesn't matter where it is. There's so many great places to go. Spear is just a place we have chosen to do our training, and we believe in it. The key is just wanting to be better, taking your practice to the next level, finding out who's smarter than you, and trying to be around those people, finding out who's passionate, and putting yourself in the room with those people. And that's what it's all about. So I thank you very much to Spear Education. and to Darin as well, once again, for being with us. And for Wes, I'm Jon. We are the Dental Guys. Wes, are you good?
Yep, everything's